Think about the various methods of assassination. Poison was a favorite, subtle and difficult to trace in an age before forensic science. A slow-acting poison could mimic a natural illness, allowing the killer to escape detection. You might see an emperor slowly weaken, his body wasting away, his physicians baffled, while the true cause remains a dark secret. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back, far back, to the heart of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Ancient Rome? You probably picture mighty legions, grand colosseums, and emperors draped in purple, wielding absolute power, living lives of unimaginable luxury, visions of triumphal parades, lavish banquets, and a golden age of limitless authority probably fill your mind. But tonight, we're going to pull back the toga and reveal the truly awful truth behind what it was really like to be a Roman emperor. Forget the glamour. Prepare for a reality filled with immense pressure, constant danger, and a profound sense of isolation. If you were the Roman emperor, you'd probably be more concerned with surviving the day than enjoying your lavish palace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, the Roman Empire, despite its immense wealth, was a colossal, expensive machine to run. At its heart was the military, maintaining hundreds of thousands of legionaries and auxiliaries, paying their wages, equipping them with armor and weapons, feeding them, and building fortifications on distant frontiers. This was an astronomical expense. Every war, every border skirmish, every troop movement drained the treasury. The emperor was perpetually in debt to his own soldiers, their loyalty often directly tied to the regularity and generosity of their pay. You drift back through the millennia, the air growing thick with the scent of marble, dust, and the distant murmur of a bustling city. You find yourself within the opulent walls of a Roman palace, the very symbol of imperial power. You might expect a life of serene authority, of effortless command. Instead, a pervasive tension hangs in the air, a subtle hum of anxiety that never truly dissipates. This is the reality of being a Roman emperor, and it's far from the picture of untroubled majesty you might imagine. You might observe the emperor, his face etched with worry, discussing with his financial ministers how to raise yet more funds. The legions demand their pay, the Praetorian Guard expects their donatives, and the frontier garrisons need supplies. Failure to meet these demands could lead to mutiny, rebellion, or even the assassination of the emperor himself. The financial stability of the empire was directly linked to the emperor's ability to keep his soldiers content. A constant, nagging pressure. You see, the power of a Roman emperor was indeed immense, almost godlike. You commanded vast armies, controlled an empire stretching across 3 continents, and held the lives of millions in your hands. Your word was law. Your whims could reshape the world. But this absolute power came with an equally absolute burden. A crushing weight of responsibility that few could truly comprehend. It's like being given the keys to the entire world, but also being told that everyone is trying to steal them. And if they do, they'll probably kill you. Consider the vast public works projects. Emperors were expected to build grand temples, magnificent aqueducts, sprawling forums, impressive bathhouses, and new roads stretching across the empire. These were not just symbols of imperial power. They were essential for the functioning of Roman society and for maintaining the emperor's popularity. But they cost immense sums of money, often requiring the emperor to levy heavy taxes or resort to other, less popular, financial maneuvers. You walk through the imperial corridors, observing the emperor. He might be surrounded by fawning courtiers, but you notice the lines of stress etched around his eyes, the way his gaze constantly sweeps the room, assessing, evaluating. He is always on, always performing the role of the supreme ruler, even in his private moments. The constant need to project strength, wisdom, and control was exhausting. You might see the emperor reviewing plans for a new forum, knowing that while it will bring him glory and the adulation of the populace, it will also empty his coffers. He must constantly balance the need for grand gestures with the harsh realities of his budget. The pressure to leave a lasting architectural legacy to outdo his predecessors was immense, but so too was the financial strain it imposed. Consider the sheer scale of the empire you are expected to govern. From the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britannia, from the bustling cities of the east to the rugged frontiers of the Rhine, every province, every legion, every citizen ultimately falls under your purview. You are responsible for maintaining peace, administering justice, collecting taxes, and defending vast borders against barbarian incursions. The sheer volume of decisions, the endless stream of petitions, reports, and crises would have been overwhelming. Think about the bread and circuses, the grain dole for the poor, and the spectacular public games. These were crucial for maintaining the loyalty and contentment of the Roman populace, particularly the volatile masses of Rome itself. Providing free or subsidized grain to hundreds of thousands of citizens, and staging lavish gladiatorial contests, chariot races, and theatrical performances, these were enormous ongoing expenses. You might observe the emperor in his study, poring over stacks of papyrus scrolls, his scribes diligently recording his decrees. He is constantly receiving dispatches from distant generals, pleas from governors, and news of rebellions or natural disasters. There is no respite, no true break from the relentless demands of governance. The empire never sleeps, and neither, it seems, can its emperor. You might observe the emperor forcing a smile as he presides over a particularly bloody gladiatorial contest, knowing that this spectacle, while entertaining the masses, is costing him a fortune. He understands that the alternative, a hungry, bored, and restless populace, is far more dangerous to his reign. The financial burden of keeping the Roman people happy was a constant, non-negotiable expense. It's like having to constantly throw massive, expensive parties for your entire city. And if you stop, they might burn your house down. Think about the profound loneliness that came with the purple. You are at the pinnacle of power, yet utterly isolated. Who can you truly trust? Your generals might harbor ambitions for the throne. Your advisors might be secretly plotting your downfall. Your own family members, as we'll explore later, could be your most dangerous enemies. Every smile might hide a dagger. Every compliment, a veiled threat. The collection of taxes was a vast and often corrupt enterprise. While taxes flowed in from every province, much could be lost to corruption, inefficiency, or the sheer difficulty of administering such a vast system. Emperors constantly struggled to ensure that enough revenue reached the imperial treasury, and they often resorted to harsh measures to extract funds from recalcitrant provinces or wealthy citizens. You might see the emperor, surrounded by a crowd of sycophants, yet feeling utterly alone. He cannot confide his fears, his doubts, or his vulnerabilities to anyone. Every word he utters is weighed, every action scrutinized. He lives in a gilded cage, cut off from genuine human connection, constantly aware that those closest to him might be the ones to betray him. It's like being the most popular kid in school, but everyone only wants to be your friend because you have the coolest toys, and they secretly want to steal them. You see the emperor, receiving reports of tax evasion from a distant province, his face darkening with anger. He knows that every denarius not collected is a denarius that cannot pay his legions or feed his people. He must dispatch stern warnings, or even military force, to ensure compliance, knowing that such actions could spark resentment or even rebellion. The concept of divine right or imperial cult, while granting immense authority, also added to the burden. Many emperors were deified after their deaths, and some even encouraged worship during their lifetimes. This elevated status meant that they were expected to be more than just men. They were living gods, infallible, omniscient. This created an impossible standard to live up to, adding another layer of pressure to their already demanding role. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the financial burden on emperors is the debasement of the Roman currency. As the empire faced increasing military expenses and economic difficulties, many emperors resorted to reducing the silver or gold content of their coins, effectively printing more money with less intrinsic value. This led to rampant inflation and economic instability, further exacerbating the empire's financial woes. You might observe the emperor participating in a religious ceremony, offering sacrifices to the gods, while simultaneously being worshipped as a god himself. The irony is palpable. He is expected to be both human and divine, to manage the earthly realm while embodying the cosmic order. This dual role was a constant source of tension, a performance that never ended. A lesser-known detail about the emperor's financial woes involves the practice of forced loans or benevolences from wealthy citizens and senators. While ostensibly voluntary, these loans were often effectively mandatory contributions, extracted under implicit threat. Emperors would pressure the rich to contribute to the imperial coffers, often promising repayment that never materialized, creating resentment among the elite. It's like your boss asking you for a voluntary donation to the company party. And you know if you don't contribute, your next promotion might mysteriously disappear. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the immense pressure on Roman emperors is the sheer number of them who met violent ends. Out of approximately 70 legitimate emperors from Augustus to Romulus. Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, over 30 were assassinated or forced to commit suicide. This high mortality rate among emperors speaks volumes about the inherent danger of the position. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the precise impact of imperial extravagance versus necessary state expenditure on the Roman economy. While some emperors were notoriously lavish in their personal spending, many scholars argue that the vast majority of imperial funds were consumed by military expenses and essential public services, making the emperor's empty treasury a systemic problem rather than just a result of personal indulgence. A lesser-known detail about the emperor's burden is the constant need to manage the Praetorian Guard. This elite unit, ostensibly the emperor's personal bodyguard, often became a kingmaker, or kingbreaker. Their loyalty had to be constantly bought and maintained through lavish donatives payments, and their displeasure could lead to a swift and brutal overthrow. The emperor was, in a sense, a prisoner of his own protectors, always needing to appease them. It's like having a really big, really expensive security team, but they also have the power to fire you, permanently. The emperor also had to manage the imperial household, a vast bureaucracy of thousands of servants, administrators, and officials. Their wages, their upkeep, and the maintenance of the imperial palaces and estates were another significant drain on resources. The emperor was not just a ruler, he was also the head of an enormous, incredibly expensive household that constantly demanded funds. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which Roman emperors genuinely suffered from mental health issues due to the immense pressure of their role. Or if historical accounts of mad emperors like Caligula or Nero were largely exaggerated by biased ancient historians seeking to discredit them. The psychological toll of absolute power and constant danger remains a complex area of scholarly discussion. You might observe the emperor reviewing the household accounts, his eyes glazing over at the sheer volume of expenses for food, clothing, and upkeep for his thousands of retainers. He knows that cutting too deeply into these expenses could lead to discontent and inefficiency within his own palace. Further jeopardizing his safety, the constant need for public approval was another relentless demand. Emperors had to provide bread in circuses, grain doles for the poor, and spectacular entertainment in the amphitheaters to keep the populace content. They had to appear benevolent, generous, and strong, even when facing personal crises or immense political difficulties. Their popularity was a fragile thing, easily lost, and its loss could be fatal. Even foreign policy had a financial cost. Maintaining alliances often involved sending lavish gifts or subsidies to client kings and barbarian tribes on the borders, essentially buying their loyalty or their temporary peace. These payments, while sometimes preventing costly wars, were a constant drain on the imperial treasury. You might see the emperor presiding over gladiatorial games, forcing a smile, waving to the roaring crowd, even as his mind is preoccupied with a barbarian invasion or a looming financial crisis. He is a performer, constantly playing to the crowd, knowing that their fickle affections could turn against him at any moment. You see the emperor reluctantly approving a large payment to a barbarian chieftain, knowing that this gift is essentially protection money, and that the chieftain will likely demand more next year, and he is constantly negotiating, constantly bribing, constantly trying to manage the empire's vast network of relationships with limited funds. Even their personal lives were not their own. Marriages were often political alliances, designed to secure power or produce heirs. rather than being based on love or personal affection. Their children were pawns in dynastic games, and their private relationships were constantly scrutinized for any hint of scandal or weakness. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, also came with the crushing burden of managing an empire's finances. The life of a Roman emperor was a relentless, often desperate, struggle to find enough money to pay his soldiers, feed his people, build his monuments, and keep his vast, sprawling empire from collapsing under its own weight. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a ledger, constantly balancing income and expenditure, and often coming up short. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the relentless pressure of the empty imperial treasury that defined the life of a Roman emperor. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a shroud, isolating the emperor from genuine human connection and exposing him to relentless pressure and danger. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a hot seat, constantly simmering with intrigue, rebellion, and the ever-present threat of a violent end. The life of a Roman emperor was a relentless struggle for survival, a gilded cage where the price of absolute power was often absolute misery. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle whisper of freedom, a stark contrast to the stifling, dangerous existence of a Roman emperor. You've just navigated the relentless financial pressures that constantly threaten to empty the imperial treasury, realizing that the Roman emperor was as much a financier as a ruler. As the phantom clink of coins fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the earthly burdens to the celestial ones. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the Roman emperor's divine burden, the crushing weight of being a living god. A role that brought immense power but also profound isolation, impossible expectations, and sometimes a terrifying descent into megalomania. You've just felt the immense pressure and profound isolation that came with wearing the purple, realizing that the Roman emperor's life was far from a serene existence. As the subtle hum of anxiety from the imperial palace fades and the comforting drone of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the burdens of governance to the most chilling reality of all. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth that for a Roman emperor, the threat of assassination was not a distant possibility, but an ever-present shadow, a hanging blade that could fall at any moment. Imagine yourself as the emperor, not merely a man, but a figure increasingly elevated above humanity. Temples are built in your honor, statues erected in every city, and coins bear your idealized effigy. You are addressed with titles like Divus Divine, Augustus Venerable, and Pontifex Maximus Chief Priest. The imperial cult, the worship of the emperor, is not just a political tool. It becomes a pervasive reality, shaping how millions view you. It's like being the most famous celebrity in the world. But everyone actually believes you can control the weather and grant wishes, and they expect you to do it daily. Imagine yourself as the emperor, walking through your lavish palace. Every shadow seems to deepen. Every unexpected sound makes you flinch. You are surrounded by guards, certainly, the elite Praetorian Guard. But you know, deep down, that they are as much a threat as they are a protection. Their loyalty is bought, not earned, and their allegiance can shift with the winds of ambition or the jingle of more gold. It's like having a bodyguard who might also be secretly auditioning for your job, and their interview involves a sharp knife. You see, the imperial cult evolved over time. Initially, emperors were often deified after their deaths, becoming divine ones and receiving temples and cults. This was a way to legitimize their successors and provide a focal point for imperial loyalty. But some emperors, like Caligula and Domitian, began to demand worship during their lifetimes, blurring the line between man and god. This wasn't always a personal choice, it was often a political necessity, a way to solidify power and demand absolute obedience. You see, the path to the Roman throne was rarely through peaceful succession. It was often paved with blood, and once on the throne, the blood rarely stopped flowing. The Roman Empire, for much of its history, lacked a clear, undisputed system of succession. There was no strict primogeniture like in later European monarchies. An emperor could name his heir, adopt one, or be chosen by the Senate or, more often, the legions. This ambiguity created a perpetual power vacuum, an open invitation for ambitious generals, disgruntled senators, or even desperate family members to seize power by force. You might observe the emperor adorned in purple and gold, presiding over a religious ceremony, offering sacrifices to Jupiter or Mars. Yet, as he performs these sacred rites, priests and citizens simultaneously offer prayers and incense to him. The air is thick with the scent of burning offerings, but also with the unspoken tension of this dual role. He is both worshipper and worshipped, a man burdened by the expectations of divinity. You might witness a scene where a popular general, fresh from a victorious campaign on the frontiers, begins to receive accolades from his troops that border on imperial worship. Whispers of his ambition reach your ears. You know you must act, either by rewarding him lavishly to secure his loyalty, or by subtly undermining him, or, most brutally, by eliminating him before he eliminates you. This constant game of political chess, where the pieces are living, breathing, and often armed men, is exhausting. Consider the immense psychological pressure of being considered a living god. Every decision you make, every word you utter, every action you take, is scrutinized not just for its political implications, but for its divine significance. A military victory is attributed to your divine favor, a famine to your displeasure. You are expected to be infallible, omniscient, and benevolent, an impossible standard for any human being. Consider the sheer number of emperors who met violent ends. As you recall from our last chapter, out of approximately 70 legitimate emperors, over 30 were assassinated or forced to commit suicide. This isn't a statistical anomaly. It's a defining characteristic of the Roman imperial office. The purple toga was often a death shroud. You might wake up each morning, wondering if this is the day the blade falls, if this is the meal that contains poison, if this is the trusted advisor who will betray you. You might see the emperor, and after a long day of audiences and decrees, retreating to his private chambers, his face etched with exhaustion. He knows he cannot show weakness, cannot admit doubt, cannot display any human frailty. The weight of divine expectation would have been crushing, forcing him to constantly perform a role that was beyond human capacity. This profound isolation meant he had no one with whom he could truly be vulnerable, no one to share the burden of his supposed divinity. You might observe an emperor once vibrant and confident, growing increasingly paranoid. He trusts no one. His food is tasted by a designated slave. His wine is poured from a sealed flask. He sleeps with a dagger under his pillow. Every new face at court is scrutinized, every whispered conversation a potential plot. This constant state of hypervigilance would have been utterly debilitating, turning the Grand Palace into a psychological prison. Think about the impact on personal relationships. How do you relate to your wife, your children, your friends, when they are constantly bowing before you, addressing you with divine titles, and treating you as a being apart? Genuine intimacy would have been almost impossible. Love and affection would be tainted by the power dynamic, by the constant awareness that you are a god, and they are mere mortals. Then there were daggers. A sudden, swift strike in a dark corridor, during a public procession, or even within the imperial bedchamber. The Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the emperor, were often the very ones to wield the blades. Their barracks were a hotbed of intrigue, where loyalty was a commodity and ambition a driving force. You hear the stories of emperors like Caligula, murdered by his own Praetorians, or Commodus, strangled in his bath. These weren't distant historical anecdotes. They were grim warnings. You might observe the emperor attempting a moment of casual conversation with a trusted advisor, but the advisor's deference, their careful choice of words, their inability to truly challenge him, would highlight the insurmountable barrier between them. The emperor lives in a gilded cage of divinity, cut off from the very human connections that sustain ordinary people. It's like being the only person on Earth who can fly, but everyone else is constantly asking you to fetch things from tall shelves. You might witness a scene where the Praetorian Guard, disgruntled by a lack of payment or a perceived slight, suddenly turn on their emperor. Their shouts fill the palace, their swords drawn. The emperor, once absolute, is now a hunted man, desperately seeking an escape that rarely comes. His own protectors become his executioners, a chilling testament to the fragility of his power. It's like your security team suddenly decides they want your job, and their resignation letter is a spear. The imperial cult was also a tool for political control. By demanding worship, emperors could enforce loyalty across the vast empire. Refusal to participate in the imperial cult, particularly for groups like early Christians, was seen as an act of treason, a direct challenge to imperial authority, and often led to persecution. The emperor's divinity was not a gentle belief. It was a powerful instrument of state power, enforced with brutal consequences. Beyond the guard, senators and powerful aristocrats were also frequent conspirators. Many still clung to the republican ideal, viewing the emperor as a tyrant. Others simply sought power for themselves. Secret meetings, coded messages, and elaborate plots were a constant feature of Roman political life. The emperor had to constantly monitor the loyalty of the elite, knowing that any one of them could be harboring murderous intent. You hear the shouts of the crowd in the amphitheater, demanding that Christians sacrifice to the emperor, their refusal interpreted as defiance. You know that this religious conformity is essential for the stability of the empire, and that dissent, however religiously motivated, cannot be tolerated. The emperor, as the chief priest of the state, is responsible for maintaining religious order, even if it means shedding innocent blood. You see the emperor presiding over a Senate meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of the senators, trying to discern loyalty from dissimulation. He knows that some of these men, outwardly respectful, might be secretly plotting his demise. The air is thick with unspoken tension, a deadly game of political poker where the stakes are life and death. One common historical fact that exemplifies the divine burden is the practice of Roman emperors adopting the title Divi Filius, son of the divine, or Divi Nepos, grandson of the divine, linking themselves directly to a deified predecessor like Augustus or Julius Caesar. This created a lineage of divinity, reinforcing their own sacred status and legitimizing their rule through ancestral godhood. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the Praetorian Guard's power is their role in the Year of the Four Emperors 69 AD. After the assassination of Galba, the Praetorians openly auctioned off the imperial throne to the highest bidder, demonstrating their immense influence and their willingness to kill to achieve their aims. A lesser-known detail about the imperial cult is the creation of specific rituals and festivals dedicated to the emperor's genius, his divine spirit, or numen, his divine power. These were not just about worshipping the emperor's person, but about honoring the divine essence that resided within him, the very force that brought prosperity and order to the empire. It's like celebrating your birthday, but everyone is actually celebrating the magical aura that surrounds you. A lesser-known detail about imperial assassination attempts involves the use of accidents. Some emperors met their end in seemingly accidental ways: a fall from a horse, a hunting accident, or a collapse during a public event. While some were genuine accidents, others were almost certainly engineered, designed to appear natural and avoid suspicion. The line between misfortune and murder was often blurred, adding another layer of uncertainty to an emperor's life. It's like your car suddenly losing its brakes on a steep hill, and you can't help but wonder if someone tampered with them. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman populace genuinely believed in the emperor's divinity during his lifetime. While public displays of worship were common, scholars question whether this was true religious conviction or a pragmatic act of loyalty and political expediency, particularly outside of Rome and among different social classes. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the true motivations behind many imperial assassinations. While ambition was often a clear factor, some scholars argue that ideological opposition to tyranny, or even genuine attempts to restore republican ideals, also played a role in certain plots, making them more than just simple power grabs. The pressure to perform miracles or demonstrate divine favor was also immense. A successful military campaign, a bountiful harvest, or the end of a plague could be attributed to the emperor's divine intervention. Conversely, a defeat, a famine, or a natural disaster could be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, or that the emperor had lost his divine favor, potentially undermining his authority. Even the emperor's own family could be a source of deadly threat. Ambitious wives, jealous brothers, or impatient sons could plot against the reigning emperor, eager to seize the purple for themselves. The imperial family, far from being a haven of comfort, was often a viper's nest of intrigue, where blood ties offered no guarantee of safety. You might observe the emperor, after a period of drought, publicly praying for rain, knowing that if it doesn't come, His people might lose faith in his divine connection. He is constantly walking a tightrope between human fallibility and divine expectation, his every action weighed against the cosmic order. You might observe an emperor, his face etched with sorrow and betrayal, realizing that a beloved family member has conspired against him. The pain of personal betrayal, combined with the threat to his life and empire, would have been immense. The Roman imperial court was a place where love and loyalty were often sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Some emperors, overwhelmed by this divine burden, descended into megalomania. Believing themselves truly gods, they indulged in excesses, cruelty, and erratic behavior, convinced that they were beyond mortal judgment. Caligula, who reportedly demanded to be worshipped as a god and built a temple to himself, is a prime example of how the divine burden could warp a ruler's mind. The constant need for vigilance meant that emperors often lived in a state of extreme isolation. They could not truly relax, could not truly trust. Every interaction was potentially a test, every gesture a clue. This profound loneliness, coupled with the constant threat, would have taken a severe psychological toll, leading to paranoia, erratic behavior, and sometimes outright madness. You see the emperor, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying self-importance, issuing arbitrary decrees, demanding impossible feats, or inflicting cruel punishments, convinced that his divine status justifies any action. His advisors, terrified, dare not challenge him, reinforcing his delusions. The ultimate power, combined with the belief in one's own divinity, could be a recipe for tyranny and madness. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a target, a beacon for ambitious men and women who would stop at nothing to seize it. The Roman emperor lived under a perpetual death sentence, his life a fragile thing, constantly at the mercy of daggers, poisons, and the shifting loyalties of those around him. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a hot seat, constantly simmering with intrigue and the ever-present threat of a violent end. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle whisper of freedom, a stark contrast to the chilling reality of the hanging blade that shadowed every Roman emperor's life. Even after death, the emperor's legacy was tied to his deification. A good emperor would be deified by the Senate, ensuring his place among the gods and legitimizing his successor. A bad emperor, however, might suffer damnatio memoriae, his name erased from monuments, his statues pulled down, his deification denied. This posthumous judgment was the final, brutal assessment of his reign, a stripping away of his divine status. You've just escaped the chilling shadow of assassination, realizing that for a Roman emperor, a dagger or poison was always just around the corner. As the phantom whispers of conspiracy fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the ever-present danger to a more subtle, yet equally pervasive, burden: the complete and utter lack of privacy. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth that for a Roman emperor, life was a continuous, exhausting public performance, where every moment, every gesture was scrutinized, leaving no room for a private self. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a sacred vestment, transforming the man into a god, but at a terrible cost. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a leisurely rule from a comfortable throne, was a relentless, often terrifying struggle to embody divinity, manage impossible expectations, and avoid the pitfalls of megalomania. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but an altar, demanding constant sacrifice and often leading to a tragic, isolated end. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the crushing weight of being a living god that defined the life of a Roman emperor. Imagine yourself as the emperor, waking in your opulent bedchamber. You might expect a moment of quiet solitude, a chance to gather your thoughts before facing the day. Instead, the doors swing open, and a stream of courtiers, advisors, and even high-ranking military officers enters. This is the salutatio, the morning reception, and it begins before you even leave your bed. You are dressed, shaved, and prepared for the day, all under the watchful eyes of dozens of people. There is no concept of a private morning routine. Your very awakening is a public spectacle. It's like having a reality TV show about your life, but it's always live, and you can never cancel it. You've just grappled with the crushing burden of being a living god. Realizing that divinity for a Roman emperor brought immense power, but also profound isolation and impossible expectations. As the phantom echoes of imperial cults fade, and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the public performance and divine expectations to the most intimate, yet often most treacherous, circle of all the emperor's own family. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of Roman imperial family life, a viper's nest of ambition, jealousy, and betrayal, where even the closest blood ties could become a deadly threat. You see, the emperor's body was not merely his own, it was the body of the state, a living symbol of Roman power and authority. Every action, every gesture, every interaction was imbued with political significance. To appear weak, ill, or even too human could be perceived as a threat to the stability of the empire. Therefore, the emperor was constantly performing, projecting an image of strength, wisdom, and divine favor, even when he felt anything but. Imagine yourself as the emperor, surrounded by your family in the imperial palace. You might expect warmth, loyalty, and a sanctuary from the relentless pressures of the outside world. Instead, you sense a subtle undercurrent of tension, a constant awareness that those closest to you, those who share your blood, might also harbor the most dangerous ambitions. The imperial family was not a haven of comfort. It was often a breeding ground for intrigue, where love and loyalty were frequently sacrificed on the altar of power. It's like a family dinner where everyone is secretly eyeing your slice of cake, but they also have daggers hidden in their sleeves. You might observe the emperor, his face carefully composed, engaging in polite conversation with a senator while a servant adjusts his toga. He cannot yawn, scratch an itch, or show any sign of discomfort. Every movement is deliberate, every word chosen with care. The pressure of this constant performance would have been immense, turning even the most mundane tasks into elaborate rituals. You see, the very nature of imperial power made the emperor's family a unique source of both strength and vulnerability. A strong, united family could provide a solid foundation for the dynasty, ensuring a clear succession and presenting a formidable front to rivals. However, the immense stakes of the throne meant that family members, particularly ambitious wives, jealous brothers, or impatient sons, could become the most dangerous conspirators. The closer they were to the emperor, the greater their potential influence, and the more direct their path to power. Consider the meals. A Roman emperor's dinner was rarely a quiet, intimate affair. Instead, it was often a grand banquet, attended by dozens, sometimes hundreds of guests. You would recline on couches, surrounded by courtiers, musicians, and entertainers. Every bite you took, every sip of wine, every conversation you had would be observed. Whispers would follow your every move, and your preferences, your moods, and your interactions would be analyzed for political meaning. You might observe the emperor's wife, the empress, a figure of immense prestige and influence. She is not just a consort, she is often a political force in her own right, wielding power through her husband, her children, and her own network of allies. She might actively participate in court intrigues, promoting her favorites, undermining rivals, and even plotting against those who threaten her position or her children's succession. Her ambition, while often serving the dynasty, could also become a direct threat to the emperor himself if their interests diverged. You might see the emperor trying to enjoy a particularly succulent piece of roasted peacock, but his eyes are constantly scanning the room, assessing the expressions of his guests, listening for any hint of dissent or conspiracy. Even the act of eating becomes a political act, a performance of imperial generosity and conviviality. It's like trying to have a quiet dinner with your family, but your entire extended family, plus all your co-workers, are also there, and they're all judging your table manners. Consider the relationship with sons. The emperor's sons were his heirs, the future of the dynasty. They were groomed from a young age for the purple, trained in military arts and governance. However, this very grooming could create impatience and ambition. A son might grow tired of waiting for his father to die, or he might feel that his own claim was stronger, or that his father was growing weak or tyrannical. This could lead to plots, rebellions, or even outright patricide. The concept of privacy, as we understand it today, was largely alien to the Roman elite, and especially to the emperor. Their homes, Even the vast imperial palaces were not private sanctuaries but extensions of their public roles. Courtiers and servants had access to almost every part of the palace, and the emperor was rarely truly alone. Even when he retreated to a private study, he was likely still within earshot of guards or trusted slaves. You might see a young prince outwardly respectful, but his eyes gleaming with barely concealed impatience as he watches his aging father. He might secretly cultivate alliances with disgruntled generals or senators, preparing to seize power if the opportunity arises. The emperor, in turn, lives with the constant anxiety of a potential coup from within his own household, knowing that his own flesh and blood could be his undoing. The stories of emperors like Tiberius, who grew increasingly paranoid about his own family, or Commodus, whose sister conspired against him, are grim reminders of this reality. You might observe the emperor attempting to read a scroll in his private library, but the muffled sounds of the palace, the distant chatter of servants, and the constant awareness of watchful eyes would make true solitude impossible. His thoughts, his doubts, his personal feelings, these were luxuries he could rarely afford to express, even to himself. The palace, despite its grandeur, was a gilded cage, offering immense power but no true escape. Think about the role of adopted sons. Since there was no strict primogeniture, as adoption was a common way for emperors to secure a successor, often choosing a capable general or administrator. While this could bring stability, it also introduced a new dynamic of loyalty and potential rivalry. An adopted son might feel less bound by blood ties, or he might face resentment from the emperor's natural children, leading to further internal strife. Think about the constant public appearances. Triumphal parades, gladiatorial games, chariot races, religious ceremonies. Public speeches, the emperor was expected to be seen, to be present, to be the living embodiment of Rome. These events were not just duties. They were essential tools for maintaining popularity, securing loyalty, and projecting imperial power. You might observe an adopted heir trying to prove his loyalty and competence, but constantly aware of the whispers from those who resent his rise. He knows that his position is precarious, dependent on the emperor's continued favor and his own ability to outmaneuver rivals within the family. You see the emperor, standing in the blazing sun, waving to the roaring crowds in the Colosseum, his voice hoarse from shouting greetings. He is exhausted, perhaps even ill, but he must maintain a facade of boundless energy and enthusiasm. His image, his charisma, his ability to connect with the masses were crucial for his survival. A popular emperor was a safer emperor. The emperor's daughters, too, could be pawns in dynastic games. They were married off to powerful senators or foreign rulers to cement alliances, often against their will. Their children, the emperor's grandchildren, could also become potential claimants to the throne, adding another layer of complexity and potential threat to the imperial family tree. Their personal relationships, too, were lived in the public eye. Marriages were political alliances, and any hint of scandal or infidelity could be exploited by rivals. The emperor's wife, children, and even close friends were also part of the public performance, their behavior reflecting on the imperial household. You see an emperor arranging the marriage of his beloved daughter to a powerful but ruthless senator, knowing that this alliance is crucial for his political survival, but sacrificing his daughter's happiness in the process. He understands that every member of his family is a piece on the imperial chessboard, to be moved and sacrificed as needed for the greater good of the empire, and his own power. You might observe the emperor and empress, walking hand in hand during a public procession, their smiles carefully practiced, their gestures perfectly synchronized. Behind the scenes, their marriage might be cold and loveless, their relationship strained by political pressures and personal betrayals. But in public, they must present a united front, a symbol of imperial harmony. It's like being in a really long, really elaborate photo shoot for a family portrait. But you secretly can't stand half the people in the picture. The constant surveillance and paranoia within the imperial family were immense. Emperors often employed spies, even within their own households, to monitor the activities and conversations of their relatives. Any hint of disloyalty, any perceived slight, could lead to accusations of treason, imprisonment, exile, or even execution. The palace, far from being a sanctuary, was a gilded prison where trust was a dangerous luxury. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the lack of privacy is the tradition of the cubicularius, or chamberlain. This was a high-ranking imperial official whose duties included overseeing the emperor's bedchamber and personal effects. While ostensibly a position of trust, it also meant that even the emperor's most intimate spaces were managed and observed by others, leaving little room for genuine solitude. You might observe the emperor listening intently to a whispered report from a trusted freedman, detailing the movements and conversations of his own brother. His face hardens as he learns of a potential conspiracy, knowing that he must act swiftly and ruthlessly, even against his own kin, to preserve his life and his throne. It's like living in a house where every family member has a secret camera pointed at everyone else, and the stakes are literally life or death. A lesser-known detail about the emperor's public life is the constant demand for imperial pronouncements or edicts on a vast array of subjects. The emperor was expected to be a fount of wisdom and justice, issuing decrees on everything from legal disputes to public works projects. This meant he was constantly being approached, petitioned, and expected to provide answers, leaving little time for private thought or leisure. It's like being the only person in the world with a smartphone, and everyone constantly texts you for advice on everything. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the deadly nature of imperial family dynamics is the fate of Agrippina the Younger, mother of Emperor Nero. A highly ambitious and influential woman, she was instrumental in Nero's rise to power. However, as Nero grew older and sought to assert his own authority, he came to view her as a threat and eventually had her murdered. A chilling example of matricide driven by imperial ambition. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which Roman emperors genuinely felt the psychological burden of this constant public performance, versus simply accepting it as an inherent part of their role. While modern psychology emphasizes the need for privacy and personal space, Roman society had different cultural norms regarding public life, making it difficult to fully assess the subjective experience of imperial confinement. A lesser-known detail about imperial family intrigue involves the use of forced suicides or convenient accidents for relatives who became inconvenient or threatening. Rather than outright execution, which could create martyrs, emperors would sometimes pressure problematic family members to take their own lives, or arrange for their deaths to appear accidental. This allowed the emperor to eliminate threats while maintaining a facade of benevolence or avoiding direct blame. It's like your family member suddenly falls out of a window, and everyone just quietly agrees it was a tragic accident. The emperor's body itself was a public commodity. His health, his physical appearance, even his illnesses were matters of public concern and political significance. A strong, healthy emperor projected an image of a strong, healthy empire. A sickly or frail emperor could be perceived as a sign of imperial decline, inviting challenges from rivals. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the alleged depravity and cruelty of certain imperial families, as depicted by ancient historians like Suetonius or Tacitus, were accurate portrayals of their actual behavior, versus being exaggerated or fabricated to serve political agendas or sensationalize history. While intrigue was certainly rampant, the degree of genuine pathology versus political necessity remains a complex area of scholarly discussion. You see the emperor perhaps recovering from an illness, forced to make a public appearance, his face painted to conceal his pallor, his movements carefully practiced to hide any weakness. The pressure to maintain a perfect physical facade, even when suffering, was immense. His body was not his own, it belonged to Rome. The very concept of a dynasty in Rome, while an ideal, was often a struggle. Unlike later European monarchies where bloodline was paramount, Roman emperors often relied on adoption, military acclamation, or senatorial approval, making their family lines less inherently stable. This meant that even a successful emperor could not guarantee that his own bloodline would continue on the throne, adding another layer of anxiety to his family relationships. Even leisure activities were often public. Hunting expeditions, banquets, and even philosophical discussions could be attended by a retinue of courtiers and advisors. True relaxation, away from watchful eyes, was a rare luxury. The emperor was always on, always performing, even when attempting to unwind. You see an emperor desperately trying to secure the succession for his chosen son, knowing that powerful factions within the Senate or the legions might prefer another candidate. He must constantly work to consolidate his family's position, to ensure their loyalty, and to eliminate any potential rivals, even if they are distant cousins or nephews. You might observe the emperor trying to enjoy a quiet moment with a book, but the constant presence of his guards, the distant sounds of the palace, and the knowledge that he could be interrupted at any moment would make true absorption impossible. His mind would always be half occupied with the affairs of state, the plots, and the endless demands of his office. Even seemingly minor disputes within the imperial family could escalate into major political crises. A quarrel between the empress and her daughter-in-law, a perceived slight by a brother, or a public display of disunity could be exploited by enemies of the emperor, undermining his authority and inviting challenges to his rule. The imperial family was a microcosm of the empire itself, prone to internal strife and constantly under scrutiny. You realize that the life of a Roman emperor, despite its unimaginable power and luxury, was a profound paradox. He commanded an empire, yet he could not command his own privacy. He was revered as a god, yet he lived a life utterly devoid of genuine human connection and personal space. The palace, far from being a sanctuary, was a gilded stage, and the emperor, its unwilling, perpetual performer, forever trapped in the relentless glare of public scrutiny. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle whisper of true freedom, a stark contrast to the suffocating, public existence of a Roman emperor. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, also came with the crushing burden of managing a family that was both his greatest asset and his deadliest threat. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a serene existence surrounded by loyal kin, was a relentless, often terrifying struggle against ambition, jealousy, and betrayal from within his own household. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a hot seat, constantly simmering with intrigue and the ever-present threat of a violent end at the hands of those he was supposed to trust most. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the poisonous relationships that defined the life of a Roman emperor. You've just navigated the treacherous waters of the imperial family, realizing that even the emperor's closest kin could be his deadliest threat. As the phantom whispers of ambition and betrayal fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the intimate dangers to the broader, often brutal reality of an emperor's legacy. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of Roman imperial power, a temporary, often fleeting authority, where even the greatest achievements could be swiftly erased, and the emperor's very memory could be condemned. You've just experienced the suffocating reality of an emperor's public life, where privacy was a forgotten luxury and every moment was a performance for the state. As the relentless glare of public scrutiny fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the burdens of ceremony to a more insidious, yet equally pervasive, threat: the emperor's own body. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of Roman imperial health, a constant battle against disease, the limitations of ancient medicine, and the ever-present shadow of an early, often undignified, death. Imagine yourself as the emperor, standing before a newly erected triumphal arch, celebrating your latest victory. The crowd roars, your name is chanted, and your image is carved into stone, seemingly destined for eternity. You feel the weight of history, the immense power you wield, and the belief that your reign will be remembered for millennia. But beneath this grand facade lies a chilling reality: your power, however absolute, is temporary, and your legacy is fragile, constantly at the mercy of your successors, your enemies, and the fickle judgment of history. Imagine yourself as the emperor, a figure of immense power, yet you feel a persistent ache in your joints, a dull throb behind your eyes, or a nagging cough that refuses to dissipate. You are surrounded by the empire's most renowned physicians. Certainly, men who have studied in Alexandria and Athens, who can recite Hippocrates and Galen, but their knowledge, vast as it was for their time, was woefully inadequate by modern standards. They understood little of germ theory, surgical hygiene, or the true causes of many common ailments. Their remedies often consisted of bloodletting, purging, herbal concoctions, and superstitious amulets. It's like having the most expensive mechanics in the world, but they only know how to fix your car by hitting it with a hammer and chanting. You see, unlike later European monarchies where a stable dynastic succession often ensured the continuity of a king's legacy, The Roman Empire, for much of its history, was a chaotic merry-go-round of power. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, often through violence. This meant that the achievements of one emperor could be swiftly undone, ignored, or even actively destroyed by the next. There was no guarantee that your grand building projects would be completed, your laws upheld, or your military victories remembered favorably. You see the emperor, and perhaps a man in his prime, suddenly struck down by a virulent fever. His physicians gather, their faces grim, debating the balance of his humor's blood. Phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They might apply hot compresses, administer emetics to induce vomiting, or perform a bloodletting, draining what they believe to be excess humors. Meanwhile, the emperor's body weakens, his breathing becomes labored, and his life hangs by a thread, often exacerbated by the very treatments meant to save him. You might observe an emperor meticulously planning a new form, pouring vast sums of money and years of effort into its construction, but before it's even finished, he is assassinated, and his successor, perhaps a rival, abandons the project, or even tears down what has been built to erase the memory of his predecessor. The very physical manifestations of your power could be dismantled, piece by piece, by those who followed you. It's like building the most amazing sandcastle on the beach, and then the next kid who comes along just kicks it over and builds their own. Consider the constant threat of infectious diseases. Rome, a sprawling metropolis, was a breeding ground for pathogens, crowded living conditions, rudimentary sanitation, and a constant influx of people from across the empire meant that diseases like malaria, dysentery, smallpox, and various fevers were endemic. The imperial palace, despite its grandeur, was not immune. A simple cold could escalate into fatal pneumonia, and a stomach bug could lead to a debilitating and deadly bout of dysentery. Consider the concept of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was a terrifying, uniquely Roman form of posthumous punishment. If an emperor was deemed a tyrant, a failure, or simply inconvenient by the Senate or his successor, his memory could be officially condemned. This wasn't just a historical judgment, it was an active erasure. His name would be chiseled out of inscriptions on monuments, his statues pulled down and defaced, his portraits destroyed, and his laws rescinded. It was an attempt to literally wipe him from the historical record, to deny his very existence. You might observe a young emperor, barely out of his teens, succumbing to a sudden illness that sweeps through the court. His advisors watch helplessly, knowing that the stability of the empire rests on his fragile life. Child mortality rates, even for imperial heirs, were shockingly high, making the continuation of a dynasty a constant gamble against unseen microbial enemies. It's a grim lottery, where the prize is merely survival to adulthood, and the odds are stacked against even the most privileged. You might witness the grim procession workmen arriving at a public square, chisels in hand, systematically defacing the face of a once revered emperor on a statue, or meticulously removing his name from a grand inscription. The very air seems to hum with the message, he never was, he never existed. For a culture so obsessed with legacy and eternal fame, this was the ultimate humiliation, a terrifying form of non-existence. It's like getting completely deleted from the internet, but in ancient Rome, and it's permanent, think about the chronic conditions that plagued many emperors. Gout, a painful form of arthritis often linked to a rich diet and excessive consumption of wine, was a common affliction among the Roman elite. You might see an emperor limping, his joints swollen and inflamed, wincing with every step, his pain a constant companion despite his imperial purple. Digestive issues, exacerbated by heavy, often unbalanced diets rich in meat and wine, were also prevalent, leading to chronic discomfort and occasional severe attacks. Think about the instability of the imperial office itself. The crisis of the 3rd century, which we touched upon, saw over 20 emperors in roughly 50 years. Many reigned for only a few months or a year, constantly fighting civil wars or barbarian invasions. Their reigns were too short, too tumultuous, to leave any lasting positive mark. Their legacies were often defined by chaos, economic collapse, and the constant struggle for survival. Their diet, while seemingly abundant and luxurious, often contributed to their ill health. Royal tables groaned under the weight of exotic meats, rich sauces, and copious amounts of wine. Fresh fruits and vegetables, especially those grown locally and in season, were consumed. But the overall balance was often skewed towards heavy, protein-rich foods. The widespread use of lead in Roman plumbing, cooking vessels especially for reducing grape juice into a sweet syrup called defrutum or sapa, and even cosmetics meant that chronic lead poisoning was a very real, though unrecognized, threat. You might see an emperor crowned in haste, desperately trying to consolidate power, fighting off multiple rivals simultaneously. He has no time for grand reforms, no opportunity for lasting peace. His entire reign is a frantic scramble, and his inevitable downfall leaves behind a kingdom even more fractured than before. His legacy is not one of achievement, but of fleeting, violent power. You might observe an emperor suffering from inexplicable fatigue, cognitive decline, or severe abdominal pain symptoms that could easily be attributed to other causes, but were, in fact, the insidious effects of lead accumulating in his system. His physicians, unaware of the true culprit, would continue to administer ineffective or even harmful treatments. It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet, but you're drinking the water that's been sitting in a lead pipe for years and you have no idea why you feel so sick. Even for emperors who reigned for decades and achieved great things, their legacies were often reinterpreted or undermined by later historians who served new regimes. The victor wrote the history, and the defeated, or simply the out of favor, were often portrayed as cruel, mad, or incompetent. The truth of their reign became a malleable thing, shaped by political expediency, beyond physical ailments. The mental health of Roman emperors was a significant, though poorly understood, issue. The immense pressure of ruling, the constant threat of assassination, the demands of maintaining a vast empire, and the profound isolation could take a devastating toll on their minds. While not diagnosed as mental illness in the modern sense, historical accounts describe periods of extreme paranoia, erratic behavior, depression, and even outright madness among monarchs like Caligula, Nero, and Commodus. You hear the ancient historians, like Suetonius or Tacitus, writing their accounts, often with a clear bias, portraying certain emperors as monsters or madmen. You realize that the image of an emperor, even centuries later, is not necessarily the objective truth, but a carefully constructed narrative designed to serve the political needs of a later era. You might see an emperor, once charismatic and decisive, withdrawing into himself, consumed by suspicion, convinced that everyone around him is plotting his downfall. His advisors might attribute his behavior to divine displeasure or a melancholy humor, while the emperor himself descends into a terrifying spiral of delusion and despair, with no effective psychological support available. The gilded cage of the palace could become a mental prison, far more terrifying than any physical one. The very concept of succession was a constant source of instability. As we've explored, the lack of a clear, undisputed system meant that every emperor's death was a potential crisis, often leading to civil war. This meant that even if an emperor had a grand vision for the empire, its realization depended entirely on the willingness and ability of his successor to continue it, which was rarely a given. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the fragility of imperial health is the death of Emperor Trajan. One of Rome's most successful emperors, he died while on campaign in Cilicia, modern Turkey, from an illness, likely a stroke or a severe infection, at the age of 63. His death, far from Rome, highlights the constant exposure to disease and the limitations of medical care even for the most powerful men. You see an emperor on his deathbed, desperately trying to secure the succession for his chosen heir, knowing that powerful factions within the Senate or the legions might prefer another. His final moments are filled not with peace, but with the anxiety of an uncertain future for his empire and his legacy. A lesser-known detail about imperial health involves the use of therapeutic baths. While Roman baths are famous for their social and hygienic aspects, emperors often used private, elaborate baths for medicinal purposes, sometimes infused with various minerals or herbs. However, the effectiveness of these treatments was often questionable, and the prolonged exposure to hot, humid environments could also exacerbate certain conditions or spread infections. It's like going to a really fancy spa for your cold, but the steam room is actually making it worse. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the fragility of legacy is the fate of Emperor Domitian. After his assassination, the Senate immediately enacted damnatio memoriae against him. His name was erased, his statues destroyed, and his decrees annulled. This was a deliberate and systematic attempt to wipe him from history, making him almost a non-person in the official record. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the true extent to which the eccentric or tyrannical behavior of certain emperors, like Caligula or Nero, was due to genuine mental illness, the effects of chronic lead poisoning, or simply the corrupting influence of absolute power combined with biased historical accounts written by their enemies. Disentangling these factors to understand their psychological states remains a complex and fascinating area of scholarly discussion. A lesser-known detail about the temporary nature of imperial power involves the phenomenon of usurpers, who briefly claimed the purple in various provinces. These rebel emperors would often issue their own coins, declare their own laws, and attempt to establish their own mini-empires, only to be swiftly crushed by the legitimate emperor or another rival. Their fleeting power and inevitable downfall highlight how easily the imperial title could be claimed, and how quickly it could be lost. It's like someone briefly declaring themselves king of their backyard, and then their parents tell them to go inside. The constant travel undertaken by emperors, especially those on military campaigns or imperial tours, also expose them to various health risks. Long, arduous journeys on poorly maintained roads, exposure to different climates, and encounters with new pathogens meant that emperors were frequently ill while away from the relative comforts of Rome. A simple fall from a horse could lead to a debilitating injury, and a chill caught during a winter campaign could turn into a fatal illness. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of damnatio memoriae. While names and statues could be removed, the memory of an emperor, good or bad, often persisted in popular culture, oral traditions, or unofficial writings. The question is whether it was truly possible to erase an emperor from memory, or if it was more a symbolic act of condemnation. Imagine yourself as the emperor, sitting in your opulent study, surrounded by advisors, but the mood is grim. The scrolls before you are not reports of victories, but detailed accounts of dwindling funds, mounting debts, and the ever-increasing cost of maintaining your vast empire. The gold and silver that flowed into Rome from conquered provinces and trade routes seemed limitless. But the expenses were equally staggering. It's like being the richest person in the world. But you have 1,000 credit cards, and they're all maxed out, and the bills just keep coming. The vastness of the empire itself contributed to the emperor's limited legacy. Decisions made in Rome might take months to reach distant provinces, and their implementation could be slow or incomplete. Local customs and traditions often persisted despite imperial decrees, meaning that the emperor's direct impact on the daily lives of many subjects was less pervasive than one might imagine. You might observe the emperor shivering in a temporary camp on the frontier, battling a persistent fever, yet still expected to review troops and make strategic decisions. His personal discomfort is secondary to the demands of the empire, and his body is pushed to its limits, often with dire consequences. You see the emperor issuing a grand decree from Rome, believing it will instantly change the lives of millions across the empire? But in a remote village in Britannia, the local chieftain continues to rule much as he always has, barely acknowledging the distant imperial authority. The emperor's reach, while vast, was not always absolute or immediate. Even their leisure activities could be dangerous. Hunting, chariot racing, or even vigorous exercise could lead to injuries that, in an age without modern surgery or antibiotics, could easily become fatal or cause chronic disability. An emperor might suffer a broken bone, a deep laceration, or a severe concussion, and the primitive medical care available would often do more harm than good. Even the grandest building projects, while impressive, were often built on the backs of forced labor, financed by heavy taxation, and often left incomplete or fell into disrepair after the emperor's death. The glory they represented was often fleeting, and the human cost immense. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a fragile garment, draped over a body constantly under siege from within and without. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a leisurely stroll through a garden of delights, was a relentless battle against illness, pain, and the limitations of ancient medical knowledge. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a hot seat, constantly simmering with the threat of disease and the ever-present shadow of an early, often undignified, death. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle reminder of the robust health and medical advancements you take for granted. A stark contrast to the awful truth of health in the Roman imperial palace. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a temporary garment, worn by a man whose legacy was constantly under threat. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a guaranteed path to eternal glory, was a relentless struggle against the forces of time, ambition, and the ever-present threat of historical erasure. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a precarious perch, and the emperor's achievements, however grand, were often fleeting, easily undone, and tragically forgotten. You've just grappled with the grim reality of imperial health, realizing that even the most powerful man in the world was constantly battling disease and the limitations of ancient medicine. As the phantom aches and fevers recede and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the emperor's body to the vast, turbulent frontiers of his empire. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the Roman emperor's military burden, a constant, relentless pressure to lead armies, defend vast borders, and quell rebellions, transforming the supreme ruler into an often reluctant, perpetually embattled general. You've just grappled with the fleeting nature of imperial legacy, realizing that even the grandest achievements could be swiftly erased, and an emperor's very memory condemned. As the phantom chisels fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now prepare for the ultimate, often grim, conclusion to their stories. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of Roman imperial endings' lives, frequently cut short by violence, illness, or political machination, leaving behind legacies that were often brief, contested, or tragically overshadowed by their demise. Imagine yourself as the emperor, not in the marble halls of Rome, but shivering in a temporary camp on a distant frontier, the biting wind whipping around your military tent. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the nervous energy of thousands of soldiers. You're surrounded by your legions, certainly, the most formidable fighting force of the ancient world. But their loyalty is not absolute, their discipline not unwavering, and the threats they face are relentless. It's like being the CEO of a global corporation, but your main job is to personally lead all your employees into constant, brutal street fights against rival companies. Imagine the final scene of a Roman emperor's life. It's rarely a peaceful passing in old age, surrounded by loving family and loyal subjects. Instead, you might picture a king, bleeding out on a muddy battlefield, his crown perhaps lost in the fray, or an emperor, writhing in agony from a sudden illness in a damp, cold chamber, his last moments filled with the anxiety of an uncertain succession. Or perhaps a young prince, imprisoned and then disappeared, his fate a mystery for centuries, his memory erased by a vengeful successor. The end for Roman royalty was often abrupt, violent, and far from glorious. You see, the Roman Empire was built and maintained by military might. From its very inception, the emperor's power rested fundamentally on the loyalty of his legions. This meant that the emperor, even if he had no personal inclination for warfare, had to be a military leader, or at least appear to be one. He was the imperator, the commander-in-chief, and his ability to command respect, inspire loyalty, and lead armies to victory was paramount for his survival. You see, despite all their immense power and unparalleled privilege, Roman emperors were astonishingly susceptible to premature and often brutal death. The average lifespan, even for the elite, was significantly shorter than today, and emperors faced unique risks that few other individuals in the empire endured. Their bodies, as we've explored, were constantly battling diseases that modern medicine easily cures, from rampant fevers to debilitating dysentery. A simple infection from a cut, a persistent cough, or a bout of malaria could swiftly claim a life that was otherwise considered invaluable for the stability of the vast empire. It's like being the most powerful person on Earth, with access to every luxury, but your biggest fear is still a common cold turning into pneumonia. You might observe the emperor, clad in military tunic and cloak, inspecting his troops, his face grim but resolute. He must project an image of strength and unwavering resolve, even when his mind is plagued by doubts or his body aches from the rigors of campaign life. He is constantly reviewing dispatches from his generals, analyzing intelligence reports about barbarian movements, and making life-or-death decisions that will affect the fate of millions. Consider the constant, pervasive threat of violence. We've discussed the brutal reality of warfare, where emperors often led from the front, exposing themselves to arrows, swords, and maces. Many emperors died in battle, or from wounds sustained in combat, their imperial purple robes stained with their own blood. But beyond the battlefield, the threat of assassination was an ever-present shadow, a chilling reality that permeated every moment of their lives. Poison, a dagger in the dark, a convenient accident. These were the favored tools of ambitious rivals, disgruntled praetorians, treacherous senators, or even desperate family members. Consider the sheer scale of the military challenges. The Roman Empire had vast, permeable borders, stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Germania, from the rivers of Gaul to the mountains of the east. Along these frontiers, various barbarian tribes, Goths, Vandals, Huns, Parthians, Sassanids were a constant threat, launching raids, demanding tribute, or attempting full-scale invasions. The emperor was perpetually engaged in a defensive struggle, a never-ending game of whack-a-mole across thousands of miles. You might witness an emperor, seemingly hale and hearty one day, suddenly struck down by a mysterious illness after a meal, his court whispering about poison, or a queen whose political influence grew too strong, found dead in her bed, her death attributed to natural causes, but suspicion lingering like a foul odor in the palace corridors. The paranoia was real and often tragically justified. Trust was a luxury few monarchs could afford, even within their own families, as we've seen. Every handshake could conceal a plot, every smile a veiled threat. You might see the emperor receiving news of a devastating defeat on the Danube, or a major incursion across the Rhine. He must immediately mobilize legions, raise funds, and personally lead or dispatch his most trusted generals to confront the threat. There is no time for leisure, no opportunity for quiet reflection. The empire is constantly under siege, and its emperor is its primary defender. Then there were the executions, for emperors who lost the struggle for power, who were deposed by rivals or rebellions. The end was often a public, humiliating, and agonizing death. Beheadings, strangulations, or even more gruesome fates awaited those who failed to cling to the throne. Their death served as a stark warning to others, a brutal demonstration that even divine right offered no absolute protection against the wrath of men, or the shifting loyalties of the legions. Think about the constant threat of military mutiny or rebellion. The legions, while loyal to Rome, were often more loyal to their victorious generals. A successful general, especially one with a charismatic personality and the ability to reward his troops, could easily turn his army against the reigning emperor. Many emperors rose to power on the backs of their legions, and many fell when those same legions threw their support behind a rival. You see a former emperor, and stripped of his imperial regalia, his once proud head bowed, led to the executioner's block. The crowd watches in grim silence, a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. His death is not just the end of a life, it's the violent severing of a dynasty, a bloody punctuation mark at the end of a tumultuous reign, meant to send a clear message to any who might dare to challenge the new order. It's like losing a game of chess, but the losing piece gets publicly smashed and then everyone else has to watch. You might observe the emperor trying to maintain the loyalty of a powerful general, showering him with honors, land, and money, all while knowing that the general's ambition could turn him into a deadly rival. The emperor lives in a state of perpetual anxiety, constantly monitoring the loyalty of his commanders, knowing that a single misstep could lead to a military coup. It's like being the coach of a championship team, but your star player is constantly threatening to quit and start his own team, and he has all the best players. Think about the profound impact of these tragic endings on their legacies. Many emperors, particularly those who died young or violently, left behind unstable kingdoms, child heirs, or ongoing succession crises. Their reigns, however promising, were cut short, and their grand plans often unfulfilled. Their legacies became defined not by their achievements, but by the chaos that followed their demise, or by the deliberate efforts of their successors to erase them. The rigors of military campaigns were immense. Emperors often spent years away from Rome, living in temporary camps, enduring harsh weather conditions, and facing the same dangers as their soldiers. They would personally oversee sieges, lead troops in battle, and endure long, arduous marches. This was not a life of luxury, it was a life of discomfort, danger, and constant physical and mental strain. You might observe a kingdom plunged into civil war after the sudden death of its emperor. His carefully laid plans for expansion or reform dissolving into anarchy as rival factions vie for power. His name, once revered, might become associated with misfortune or instability. The very memory of his reign could be systematically erased or vilified by the victorious faction, a form of damnatio memoriae to legitimize the new regime. As we discussed, this posthumous punishment was the ultimate insult, a terrifying form of non-existence for a culture obsessed with eternal fame. You feel the biting cold of a winter campaign in Germania, the constant dampness, the taste of stale rations. You see the emperor, his face grimed with dirt, his armor dented, sharing the hardships of his men. He might be suffering from a fever or a lingering injury, but he cannot show weakness. His presence on the front lines is essential for morale, a testament to his courage and his commitment to his troops. The concept of short-lived glory was a recurring theme throughout Roman imperial history. An emperor might achieve a stunning military victory or secure a lucrative alliance, only to die unexpectedly shortly thereafter, leaving his successor to grapple with the complexities of maintaining those gains. The fleeting nature of life meant that even the most ambitious and successful monarchs often had limited time to solidify their achievements, and their grand visions could crumble with their last breath. Beyond external threats, internal rebellions were also a constant military burden. Disgruntled provinces, ambitious governors, or even religious minorities could rise up against imperial authority, requiring the emperor to dispatch legions to brutally suppress them. These internal conflicts, often just as bloody as external wars, further drained the empire's resources and the emperor's energy. You see an emperor, triumphant after a major battle, celebrating his victory, perhaps planning his next grand campaign. But a few months later, he succumbs to a fever caught during the siege, and his hard-won gains begin to unravel under the less capable or less interested hand of his young heir. The fragility of life made long-term planning a constant gamble, a race against time that most emperors ultimately lost. You might witness the emperor receiving reports of a widespread rebellion in Gaul or a revolt in Egypt. He must decide whether to negotiate, offer concessions, or send in the legions to crush the uprising with overwhelming force. The decision is rarely easy, and the consequences, both for the rebels and for the stability of the empire, are immense. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the tragic and often violent end of Roman emperors is the fate of the Year of the Four Emperors in 69 AD. In just one tumultuous year, 4 different men claimed the purple, and 3 of them, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, met violent deaths, either by assassination or forced suicide, before Vespasian finally established a more stable reign. This period is a stark microcosm of the constant danger that defined the imperial office. One common historical fact that vividly illustrates the military burden on emperors is the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 284 AD. During this period, the Roman Empire was plagued by constant civil wars, barbarian invasions, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, often lasting only a few months or years as military commanders vied for power, constantly fighting each other and external enemies. A lesser-known detail about imperial deaths involves the phenomenon of death by misadventure during hunting. While many emperors were keen hunters, the sport was incredibly dangerous. Fatal accidents, such as being gored by a boar, falling from a horse, or even being struck by an errant arrow, just were not uncommon. Emperor Julian, for example, died on campaign in Persia from a wound, possibly from a spear, though some accounts suggest it was from friendly fire or an accident, highlighting the ever-present dangers even outside formal battles. It's like being the most powerful person in the world, but your biggest threat might be a rogue deer. A lesser-known detail about the emperor's military role involves the practice of donatives. These were large cash payments given to the Praetorian Guard and the legions upon an emperor's accession, or after a major victory. While seemingly a gesture of generosity, these payments were essentially bribes, a necessary cost to secure and maintain military loyalty. The emperor was constantly beholden to his soldiers, his very survival dependent on keeping them well paid and content. It's like having to constantly pay off your employees to keep them from overthrowing you. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the true causes of death for many Roman emperors. particularly when contemporary accounts are vague, politically motivated, or contradictory. The lack of detailed medical records and forensic science means that many imperial deaths, especially those that appear sudden or suspicious, remain subjects of intense speculation and conflicting theories, making it hard to definitively separate natural causes from deliberate foul play. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which Roman emperors truly commanded their armies in battle versus relying heavily on their generals. While many emperors certainly had military experience and were present on campaigns, the practicalities of commanding vast armies meant that much of the tactical decision-making often fell to their trusted subordinates, making the emperor's leadership more symbolic than direct in some cases. Even for those who lived to a relatively old age, the end of their reign could be a period of decline and loss of power. An aging monarch might face challenges from ambitious sons, rebellious generals, or a populace weary of their rule. The transition of power, even when peaceful, was often fraught with tension and the potential for instability, with the elderly emperor often struggling to maintain control. The sheer financial cost of maintaining the legions and fighting constant wars was an immense burden on the imperial treasury. Emperors were perpetually seeking new sources of revenue, often through heavy taxation, debasing the currency, or confiscating wealth from their enemies. This constant financial strain could lead to economic instability, inflation, and widespread discontent among the populace. You might observe an elderly emperor, his mind still sharp, but his body failing, struggling to maintain control over his fractious legions and ambitious advisors. His sons, eager for the throne, might subtly undermine his authority, or even openly plot against him. The final years of his reign are a grim struggle to hold on to power, a slow, agonizing descent from the pinnacle of authority, often ending in isolation and betrayal. You see the emperor, his face grim, discussing the dwindling treasury with his financial advisors. He knows that if he cannot pay his legions, their loyalty will waver, and his empire will be vulnerable. The pursuit of military security often came at the cost of economic prosperity for his subjects. The ultimate tragedy for many Roman emperors was the fleeting nature of their personal legacy. Despite the grand monuments they built, the wars they fought, and the dynasties they founded, their individual impact could often be overshadowed by the tumultuous events that followed their deaths. Their names might be remembered, but the details of their lives and the true extent of their struggles often faded into the mists of time, replaced by idealized legends or vilified caricatures, all shaped by the political needs of later eras. Even the triumphal parades, those grand displays of military glory, were not without their burdens. The emperor, returning victorious to Rome, had to endure hours of public acclamation, leading a procession through the city, displaying his captives and spoils. While glorious, it was an exhausting performance, a final act in a grueling military campaign. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a temporary garment, worn by a man whose legacy was constantly under threat. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a guaranteed path to eternal glory, was a relentless struggle against the forces of time, ambition, and the ever-present threat of historical erasure. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a precarious perch, and the emperor's achievements, however grand, were often fleeting, easily undone, and tragically forgotten. You realize that the purple toga, while symbolizing ultimate power, was also a military uniform, often stained with the metaphorical or literal blood of battle. The life of a Roman emperor, far from being a leisurely rule from the comfort of Rome, was a relentless, often brutal struggle for military survival. He was a general first, a ruler second, constantly facing invasions, rebellions, and the ever-present threat of a military coup. The throne was not a comfortable seat, but a watchtower, constantly scanning the horizons for the next threat. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the relentless clang of steel and the constant pressure of military command that defined the life of a Roman emperor. You've just emerged from the relentless pressures of military command, realizing that the Roman emperor was as much a general on the battlefield as a ruler in the palace. As the imagined clang of steel fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the military might to the economic realities that constantly threaten to undermine it. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the Roman emperor's financial burden, a constant, insatiable demand for funds that often left the imperial treasury empty, creating relentless pressure and sometimes leading to desperate, unpopular measures